Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Natalie Stillwell from SoGoesTheFuture.com. Today, we are talking about gender identity and sexuality, and I'm interviewing Steve Picorni. He is a freedom coach and an author of an upcoming book. Steve, do you mind explaining a little bit more what you do?
Sure, absolutely. Natalie, first off, thank you very much for hosting this series and for having me with you. Yes, I'm the founder of Freedom Coaching. It's founded freedom-coaching.net, where I work with those involved with pornography, attraction, and compulsion to help them break them of this permanently. We want to transform those desires based on grace. And as I'm sure your listeners and watchers of this are very well aware, the issue of pornography is a huge issue, and I think it couples into a whole host of issues that affects everyone on the planet, shall we say. And I think it dovetails into the issue at hand that we're going to discuss today.
How did you come to be so interested in this topic?
Sure. So with what I do, my personal work. So part of it's personal conversion. I was hooked on this for about 12 years and thinking kind of like I often will say in my testimony, kind of like a woman who had an abortion 30 years ago, who goes to confession week after week, thinking that she can never be free. This will always be with her. I thought this is my cross to carry forever. And through a series of events, God illuminated me to healing, and there was deep healing that came there. And that the foundation of that was a brokenness in my own family life. Growing up, my father was out of the picture by the time I was 5. So having that lack of intimacy, of genuine masculine formation, I should say, that many people now are dealing with, are facing in their lives. And so there was a genuine healing and a series of healings that happened through that. And then the whole process that was given to me, I'd say divinely appointed, given to me to serve others. And it's been a great grace in being able to see, so many people being set free, lasting, so that they can go live the life that God is calling them to live.
And what is your education background?
Sure. I'm actually have a BA in philosophy from John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio, and then also a master's in theology with specialization in catechetics from Franciscan University, and also an MTS, or a master's in sacred theology from the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C. And that's focused obviously on marriage and family studies.
That's wonderful. I'd love for you to just explain, what are gender differences? Just start with the basics.
Sure. This is a very, very difficult and challenging topic for some. And I think we have to start out, let's start out with the words of Scripture, right? From the very beginning, He created us, God created them male and female. So, and there's a purpose to that. I think there's a purpose and a plan. Whatever God does, whatever He intends, there's always a meaning and a purpose. And I think this is where, in the world we're in right now, there's a desire from a wide variety of sources to want to undercut any essential meaning to those things. And when we don't have an essential meaning, I think there's a great confusion. And I think this is where we get into the whole quote unquote gender confusion that's out there. And so when we're talking about the issues of that we've been created male and female, we have to say that this is biological. Okay. But as Catholics, this is much more than mere biological. If we're using the language of St. John Paul the Great's theology of the body, that the body is a revelation of the person. The body is a revelation of the mystery of God and a revelation of the mystery of the person, because there's always more for us to know. So we start on the biological level and then we go deeper into that. And I think, so the distinctions that have to be made here, and I also want to relate to those who are watching this, that I would be very hesitant to use, even though this is becoming widely more used, to use the term gender. In a very real sense, gender, if you look historically, is a very new term. It's somewhere in the mid 1800s, where literally they wanted to differentiate homosexual from heterosexual, and we'll unpack those terms a little bit later. And the reason why, taking a step back, why we have to go and do this is because we got to know what terms we're using here, because I think in this whole discussion, we're talking here, they're talking here. Or if you want to flip it around, I mean, I'm not saying, we're not saying we're better than anyone who holds a different opinion, but there are two differentiating perspectives here. And if we try to use their language without understanding them, or vice versa, I think this is where you get into a lot of the conflicts that go on. So within this, we start with being male and female, but then the understanding of what it means to be masculine and feminine. I think there's room for discussion here, in the fact that I think, and maybe it's a flaw, especially for us as Christians, as Catholics, that what I do is who I am. That's my identity. So if we think of historically, it's been men who have gone out and engaged the world outside the home, and have been lawyers, doctors. I'm talking, let's say, the last 100 years ago, right? Doctors, lawyers, they were going outside the home, and for good or for bad, the language was a woman's place was the home. And I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that language, especially because I'm married and my wife would have words to bring there. But it was the idea that wives women were the ones in the home. They were the homemakers. They were the ones taking care of those things. And certainly, since the idea had been that these are the roles, those roles define the sexes. This is what women do. This is what men do. And I think we have to go as especially as in the cultural milieu we are, that a woman, for instance, may have a strength in mathematics, where typically, and there's a lot of evidence of men typically being stronger in math, but a woman very much may have it. I have a sister-in-law who is strongly looking into becoming an engineer. Okay. And if that historically had been seen as a male occupation, does that make her any less of a woman? Or let's flip it around for a man who has believes that they're called to serve as a nurse, and nurses typically historically have been viewed as female roles. Does it make them any less of a man? And I would wholeheartedly reject and say absolutely not. No, if what we do is not necessarily who we are. Right? I think the language we need to start with, that we're beloved sons and daughters of God who are called to infinite love, because we come from love, to live in love, to go back to love. But we have to make it very clear, Natalie, that the basis of any of this discussion starts with the body. What is the body? Who is the body in a certain sense? If we're saying that the body is not simply this a separate entity of me, like we see, we in our previous discussions, Natalie, we've talked a little bit about with the Cartesian dualism from Rene Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am." The idea that my identity is only in my mind, that whatever I can conceive, I can be. But and as Dr. Schindler of the John Paul II Institute would always say, we're all Cartesians, because we're always separated. None of us are fully integrated in us. And I think this is where we need grace to really illuminate and to reintegrate, especially because we are subject to the fall. We do experience the weight of concupiscence many times, right? And sometimes we follow that path of concupiscence. And so for us as male and female, it's figuring out, first seeing in that identity in my male or my female body, and then what is God calling me to do? How is he calling me to live out that male or female body in an act of love, and let's define love for a moment, right? That act of being a sincere gift of self. And I think that's the context I want to use in this conversation that we're having today.
Can you also quickly define concupiscence?
Sure. One of my favorite theological words. Okay. Concupiscence, for layman's terms, is those, if we think from the beginning with Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve, their creation was oriented towards a total gift of self, towards each other, towards themselves, to love themselves rightly, because we cannot give what we do not have, and ultimately towards God, the full total giving. So there was no selfishness there. With the fall, with them making a definitive choice against God, original sin enters in. We as Catholics believe that baptism wipes out original sin, but what remains is concupiscence, which is, in a nutshell, that desire to want to serve oneself over serving the other, to be selfish. And we find this in so many different areas, right? And it goes against others, again, against ourselves, and also against God. What is truly best in those relationships? And so it can be with food, that I want to eat too much food, that I want to go and work out too much. I have a propensity towards anger, maybe rooted in justice, that I take a little too far and I snap at my children. And then obviously we see this played out in the whole realm of sexuality, where I want to pursue physical pleasure over what is good for the other, myself, and for God.
Thank you. I know that a lot of our conversation will have to involve clarifying language. And as you alluded to, we live in a time and a culture where we don't really speak in the same philosophical terms. And, we're not all academics. And so sometimes we speak past each other, and some people are offended by the terms people use because we're misunderstanding each other's intentions. One thing I want to touch on before we go further down that road is, why did God make male and female? What's the purpose of having that dichotomy of sexes within the human race?
Great. That's not a loaded question at all, Natalie. It is because of, I would say it down to one word, beauty. Our God is a God of beauty, and he wants to unveil beauty. And I want to start with that language because, think of a sunset, right? No one looks at a sunset and says, okay, that's enough, you can turn it off now, right? We want to go deeper and deeper into it. No matter what we may have experienced in our lives, of experience a good marriage, growing up in one, or a bad marriage or non-existent marriage where we were growing up, I think if we're honest, when we see a newly married couple who have the whole gaga eyes going on, there's something beautiful there. Right? Or something captures us. It goes beyond words, and there's this, and especially if we've experienced that longing that St. Paul talks about, right? The groaning of the Spirit. That's what I'm trying to illuminate here. And even if we have experienced marriage not in the most healthiest ways, that pain is an indicator that we're made for something more. Right? We're made for beauty. We're made to participate in this, and it's not, obviously I'm putting it in the terms of marriage as defined by God, that union between husband and wife, of male and female. What is this connection? Right? We like to say that it is in male and female that we reveal God. Think about it. If we look at this whole nature, I like to use this in some presentations, and I stole this directly from Father Thomas Loya, who's a Byzantine priest in Homer Glen, Illinois. And he talks about how with men, if you look at a man's body, we want to go out. We want to push out, right? Natalie, maybe yourself, right? You try to talk to a guy about a very serious issue or things like that. He's going to want to go to his man cave, leave me alone, and I'll come out when I'm good and ready to discuss it. Okay. And also for guys, we want to go out and for a lot of us, take over the world. We want to go on. This is why we're obsessed with sports. We don't want to just play the game and everybody gets a trophy. No, we want to crush the opponent. It's a part of who we are as guys. And so it's this going out. Well, what does that have to do with, because the catechism makes it very clear. God is neither male nor female, but he is masculine and feminine. And before anybody accuses me of calling God our mother, I want to make that very clear. No, God is our Father, but God is both masculine and feminine. Where did that come from? This is embodied in the male and female bodies. And so within this, has anybody out there just asked the question? Ask that question: where is God? This especially happens with students on test day. God, where are you, right? I need you right now. It's God is transcendent. God is far. If you try any woman trying to, my wife says, like, she is constantly trying to figure me out. Like, what are you thinking, right? And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And so it's this transcendent nature. Well, if you think of, and this has to do with, look directly at a man's body. A man's body goes out from the way our genitalia goes out from ourselves. This is the way it's programmed in us. Well, flip it around to a woman's body. What is the language? And by the way, the language of a man's body then is that of initiation, to initiate this great and tremendous gift. Now, flip it around. Woman, if you look at a woman's body, if we truly have the eyes to see it, and sadly, so many in our culture are profoundly blind. We are blind. We've never learned how to see the body correctly. And the onus of this is coming down on women, and women being hammered with this. And so much of the pain that's coming in, I think, that is tied in this issue of quote unquote transgenderism, is this utter rejection of masculinity, because all that has been viewed in many corners has been false masculinity instead of genuine masculinity, genuine maleness, and living out the gift of being a man as designed by God. So a woman, if we can really take the veils off of the lies that often are put on our culture about what it means to be a woman, at root is the language of receptivity, to receive. And receptivity is not a weakness. It is not something, a threat to the identity there, but it is to have the capacity to bring forth something more. Like, if we think on a basic level, every woman typically has the ability to receive love into her, to conceive love and life, and to bear that love and life to the world. Every human being, male and female, has the ability to receive the love of God into their hearts, to conceive divine love and life, and to bear the divine love and life to the world. And every woman's body screams this if we have the ability to see it. And if we look at a woman's body, to bring a woman's body with this receptivity speaks of this, to bring close, to bring this imminence, that I am near. And I ask the question to our viewers, have you not ever had the experience that God is near, God is present? And if we have not, then we need to go to adoration, fall on our knees, and beg for that, because he longs to draw near to us. And this is very motherly, right? This is where the feminine understanding, the nature of God is, and I would humbly argue is embodied most importantly in the person of Mary, right? And so going back, if we want to use a little tongue in cheek or thing like that, would be, a woman, when a woman has an issue, Natalie, maybe, what do you want to do? You want to talk about it. And talk about it, and talk about it, and talk about it. And if you're married to one of those, you're not going to bed at 11:30. Okay, I know this. I'm married to one. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's how. And it's kind of interesting. If men's identity are outwards, many times we process inwards. A woman's identity is inwards, but she likes to process outwards. It's a unique way in which God does it. And what is this all about, right? If we have the eyes to see it, God wants to reveal himself in and through male and female. And that's why I say to our viewers, what we are studying, actually what John Paul the Great had talked about, he said, this is the fundamental education that must be given. It's not mathematics, it's not reading. It is the understanding of who we are as male and female. Because if we get this right, we get reality right. And if we don't, then everything is brought into question here. And if we take, obviously, divine revelation in the New Testament, what is this pointing to? It's pointing to the union of Christ and his church. The union what is the church? The church is the kingdom of God, is the place where we find our home. And what is that? The deeper meaning, it is a marriage. It is a wedding. It is the wedding of Christ and his bride. And again, go back to my original piece that I mentioned here. There's beauty in marriage. If we really take our eyes, what are we longing for? Even if there's that hurt, we know there's something beautiful here. So with Christ's union with the church, it's male and female that is an image of this, a sign. We are visible, we are tangible, we are physical people. This is why we are sacramental people, and the physical is meant to reveal the invisible. That is what it's called to. So our very bodies, we are to transformers, right? We are more than meets the eyes. We are much more than simply what's on the mere physical level, but it's not detached from the physical level. And I think that's a very important distinction, because with the issue, what we're talking about here is there is this wanting to rend the two apart, that the physical has nothing to do with who I really am. And we want to say, as Catholics, and this is where we must hold the line, this is the ditch to die in, that the physical really matters. And I think this is where we must not be afraid of this, but to plunge ever deeper into this, plunge into the mystery of human sexuality. What is that really genuinely pointing to? And one other thought, and maybe this will springboard to another conversation, is to our viewers, right? To not be afraid of that, because so many of us, Natalie, I think in our previous conversation, we talked about this, of when we experience the forbidden fruit, shall we say, right? So many of us have misused our sexuality, and we think the way to deal with it is to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, right? I experienced this wound of my sexuality. There's so much shame and guilt here. Let's throw it out. Let's not even talk about these issues. And I think that would be a grave mistake. And I would also look at, yes, this is a challenging topic in front of us, but if we look at this, flip it around, this is a beautiful opportunity to catechize, to teach, to start with teaching our children about what is the meaning of our bodies, what is the meaning of male and female, what is the meaning of love, how am I called to live my life in service in and through my body, and then to take this and befriend those that we meet and show them that even though if there's confusion, if there's hurt, it's a sign that you're meant for more. You're meant for something that is truly beautiful. And I'd like to introduce you to the one who can really provide and fulfill those deepest desires.
And I think this touches on really the heart of the issue. You keep mentioning pain, and everyone I've interacted with or watched on YouTube who struggles with gender identity or calls themselves transgender, there's pain. They do not like having incongruity and a lack of integrity in their being and their sense of who they are internally. And I've heard that the suicide rates are extremely high among adolescents and youth who are experiencing gender identity issues. So I guess I have a two-part question. In one sense, what is God's calling and his ultimate answer for the person who has a very real struggle? Like where does their hope lie when it comes to what our Creator, who intended us to be male and female, has revealed to us? Maybe we should just start with that question.
Sure. Again, that's a loaded question. Let's see if we can unpack it. So after the fall, things get messed up. And I think we do need to go think of that original. If we don't, and I think why I keep going back to this, and why it's so important, why theology of the body, if you've not studied it, if you've not entered into this, I challenge you, take up the text, take up a good commentary on this, okay? Because it really helps to illuminate a whole bunch of answers for us and gives us a context in how do we respond, especially as new things. Because like if we're using the term transgender, it's not in the Bible. So how do we talk about it? But I would argue, in a certain sense, it is, because did you not read that from the beginning he created them male and female? So there's a perspective here. So after the fall, right, things get messed up in everything, and we are dealing with the realm of this. Like there's a song by Switchfoot that says the shadow proves the sunshine, right? The brokenness that we experience, the hurt, tells us that we're made to have that whole. We're made to be complete. We're made to be integrated. We're meant for it. And those who would do harming actions to themselves, those who would want to deny their being male or female, is a cry for genuine love, a genuine affirmation. And so let's take this to begin delving into an answer on this. Let's say somebody who has alcoholism, right? There is some scientific evidence that those with alcoholism, for some of them, there's a quote unquote a predisposition in their genes. Okay, so do we say to that person, you were born that way and just go drink? No. Why wouldn't we do that? Because we know ultimately the way in which that perspective of using alcohol, and remember, alcohol is a gift if we use it rightly. If not, then I don't know what the wedding of Cana is all about, right? But if that's a gift being misused, and that's their quote unquote predisposition, we wouldn't say, go ahead and drink yourself to death. No, that would be the unloving, that would be the unkind thing that would be a violence to them. We would be doing an act of violence. It's if we knew that what's going to harm them is really going to harm them, and they are unaware of that, then I believe we have a duty to say something. There's an intervention that needs to be done. Now, do we have to say, what the hell's wrong with you? If you keep drinking, you're going to go to hell. Like, no. Like, sorry for getting a little loud there.
But the point is well made.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's where when we've experienced again that wound of our own sexuality, there's been a tendency in the church to come across as wagging the finger, of being judgmental, of hammering people that are not living their sexuality in an integrated way, which to simply defined would be chastity, to live that out. And I would argue very few of us are completely chaste in everything we do. We are always in need of being chaste, right? I want one more cookie when I should only have 2 cookies, right? That's an unchaste way of eating. And obviously I take it one more glance at that woman in a way that's not of love, that's in a way of lust, that would be unchaste. And that's where, and that thought, that desire begins in my heart, right? That was planted, a proposal, given temptation. So within this, we would want to not go and condemn that person who is an alcoholic. We want to say, listen, I think there's a better way. And let's have a conversation. What are you really looking for? And I think what it calls us to, a proper response here, it's about getting messy. If we can quote one of the things of Pope Francis that said, we're called to get out of our comfort zones and get messy and get into the mess of people's lives. And this is a huge challenge because we are really comfortable. And Jesus, the old phrase goes, came to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Which side are we on? And I have to admit, I'm guilty. I live in Texas. I like where I live. And maybe called to do something else, get out of my comfort zone, right? So let's flip this around, right? Those who genuinely experience this inner conflict of the physical body that is a gift from God, and they don't view it as a gift. And this is a sad reality. This gifted body that's been given to them of being male or female. Again, we're starting on that conversation. And this disintegration, if for 1 minute we think that a male body, that to do what has typically been female actions, put on a dress, put on makeup, right? Or even worse, right? You see some of the quote unquote sex changes, where I would argue that sex can never be eviscerated. Why? Because down to their DNA, they are male or female. The biology reveals the reality. And we can never eviscerate, no matter what a person looks like. Okay? So from this, there has to be a coming to meet these people, coming to meet them where they're at. It may require, in that initial conversation, right, of using their language, using the term transgender, using those things, even though context goes and says that I think it's an improper language. That's why I use the term sexuality and not gender, because places like the UN or Facebook are now throwing out 54, 60 genders. And it's kind of like after the Protestant with the Reformation, right? When you start to separate from the truth, you start to get splintering everywhere to now we have 30,000 different churches. You're seeing in a parallel way, you're seeing a splintering of whatever I think goes, whatever I feel goes, whereas objective reality here has no bearing, has no basis. And because I think of us as Christians, we have failed. We need to acknowledge where we have failed. We have failed to show genuine love, that there are those who experience this inner turmoil, this inner conflict. And and we can get more into the causation versus what's the phrase? Causation versus
correlation.
Correlation. Thank you very much. It's early still. I think there's a discussion that can and perhaps we'll have that here, but within the person, that we fail to view the utter goodness of those who have struggles. We in certain have been selfish in wanting to keep my life so neat and tidy and not get involved in the mess of people. And this doesn't mean we have to go and let's go find out where the quote unquote transgender people hang out and go do that. That might be your calling, pray about that. But I think it has to do with where are we right now? Let's say very simply, right? If we're married, if we have children, right? Then, okay, how are we loving our spouse, right? How are we loving our children? Start there. If the family is the foundation of civilization, and I would humbly argue that those who experience a brokenness in their sexuality, it has its roots in a failure to receive love in the family. Then the solution, like we say with the alcoholic, is not to bash them over the head and call them evil and say that they're cut off from love. No, I love you so much that you are called to genuine love. And the actions that you're doing is not, let's have that, is that really going to get you to genuine love? Which begs the question, what is love? And I think with this whole discussion, there is no discussion on love at all. There is simply a discussion about lust, about how can I gratify myself sexually. That's the way to my fulfillment. That's often the ideal with the whole same-sex movement, the whole same-sex marriage movement, with all of these things, where we've reduced the body down to a means of what can allow for pleasure. And if the body does not allow for pleasure, then we need to do whatever we can to minimize or eliminate this. You yourself mentioned so many of those have this interior conflict, and the rates of suicide are extremely high. It's because, again, there's a lot to unpack here, but that lack of view of the goodness of suffering. And yes, I said suffering because take it to where it can go. It can point us to where we're supposed to go. It can point us to genuine love. And if we doubt for one moment the beauty and value of suffering, then we haven't spent enough time contemplating the cross of what Jesus has done. So I think our response needs to be one of genuine care and compassion, not changing reality, not saying that, no, maybe there is a fourth gender. No, we are male and female, but let's have a discussion about, what are those genuine feelings and how can we integrate them here into who we really are?
So if you don't mind, I wanted to elaborate on a point and then let you kind of run from there with it. Sure. You did mention that sometimes the confusion over gender is rooted in relationships and dynamics within the family, and wounds there. And we've also discussed, you and I are both very into natural health, that, we're aware that there are chemicals and things in our environment these days, and they're very influencing on the development of a child in the womb. I mean, they're so vulnerable to these chemicals. And there's using the theological language, there's this physical evil that we can experience where we can get cancer. We can have no hearing, we can be deaf. We could have some sort of rewiring from these chemical influences that influences our sense of our sex internally in a way that's not congruent with our biological sex. And I'm glad you brought up suffering, because it's obviously a very terrible cross. Like, I can't imagine, honestly. Like, it sounds, I think I would struggle greatly if that was the case, because I love being a woman. And if things were not quite in alignment, it would be very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So on one hand, it's like God wants us to have integrity. And what I hear you saying is, we have a biological sex. It's beautiful. It has a purpose. But sometimes whatever kind of influence is coming at us can affect our internal identity of sex, but that we have to accept the suffering and the mess of that reality and find the ways to live our biological sex as authentically as you can. But as you mentioned in the beginning, masculinity and femininity, there is some room for discussion. It may be that a biological male is a little more feminine and a female might be more masculine. And, we're having to make room for that difference more and more. So I just wanted to throw that out there and let you kind of run with anything that seems important off of that, or clarify anything if I'm misunderstanding.
Sure, and I think, and again, I think there's a lot more to this. There's a gentleman by the name of Simon LeVay, okay, and I think where a lot of the contemporary roots, let's say there, contemporary roots of the whole quote unquote transgenderism movement come from the same-sex movement, okay, and there's been that discussion for a long while to want to say that those with same-sex attraction, and again, you'll notice I don't use the term gay. I don't use the term gay, straight, homosexual, heterosexual, or male or female. I think that language is very important, because using in a proper language something that's coming from the outside, that's not inherent to who we really are, is ultimately, again, an act of violence against the person. We have to know who a person really is. They're male or female. And so there's been certain pockets trying to find a quote unquote gay gene, right? And in the work of Simon LeVay, who is, from what I understand, favorable to the same-sex movement, has said there is no gay gene. It doesn't exist. What he has found in some of his studies there are differentiations in the brain. Okay, and again, I think this is an important distinction to make. Again, we are not our brains. We're not merely our brains. Our brains are a part of who we are, but they're not only our brains. And so they've done studies of even twins in the womb, right? And later on, longitudinal studies of two men. One male has opposite sex attractions, and one of those, their twin has same-sex attractions. Okay, and if it was a biological gene aspect, then they would have the same there, right? If it was rooted. So that's one of the ways in which he's explained that, or come to learn that. But can there be differentiation in the brain? Absolutely, right? And I think this is where it's, in a certain sense, it's the wonderment of who we are. So I mean, you do have historically, men have been seen as the more beastly, more aggressive, things like that. But there may be a man who is very gentle, very good with children, likes to work at has a healthy sexuality, but likes to work at a daycare, right? Maybe really good with, in a healthy way, healthy relating to children, helping them to only see their own goodness and things like that. Does it make the money less a male? No, that's a gift that's been given to them. So I think that's the discussion of who am I first and how am I called to do this. So in development, so there is, let's go back a little bit. So in the womb, right? Natalie, you hit it correctly. Our food supply, especially in the U.S., has been tanked since the 60s, right? We're not getting the nutrients and minerals we're doing. We have pumped tons of hormones into our meat. We've pumped the contraceptive pill flushed it down the into our sewer system. I'm a male, but I have way more estrogen in my body, so this is my body that needs to be necessarily. And I live with 4 women, if you include the dog. Okay, so I know what it's like being around them. I love women. I love estrogen appropriately put there. And so those things, though, if for one moment, if we think, there's the old phrase that goes, "God always forgives, man sometimes forgives, nature never forgives." And if we think for one moment what we're doing, and I think there is some truth. This is not to say that everything in the quote unquote green science is legitimate, but the consequences of how we treat our bodies, the consequences of how we treat the world in which we live in, right? If we are constantly polluting, there's going to be an issue. So there is some evidence that because of these pollution, those who are growing up in the womb, who are developing in the womb, those 9 months in our mother's wombs, there's some changes that have happened. And this is not necessarily the way in which God designed it to be, right? This is a consequence of sin, in a certain sense, a structure of sin, shall we say. Nothing of their own personal fault, but it's the way things are. Like a very, very small, it's tiny fragment of our population are quote unquote intersex, having been born with both male and female genitalia. Right? A penis and a vagina. And they usually have been raised throughout, one sex or the other. That's historically. And now there's a movement to want to validate they can go into whatever bathroom. And I think the bathroom issue, I think that's a whole other discussion here. We'll bracket that. But within this we have to look at, they're not bad, but they are experiencing some of the weights of brokenness, the weights of sin. Now, just because that derivation or deviations, so we say, from the norm, does it mean we utterly scrap the norm and just say there is no norm in anything? No, because if you think about children, Natalie, I know you have children, I have children. Children thrive on order. When there is no order, good golly, help me. And I think this is one of the root pieces is there's a disorder inside them. That those who are experiencing, same-sex attraction or experiencing not being at home in my body, there's a disorder that's happened. And so part of this, I think, is for some of them, there may be a physical maldevelopment. Okay, we do know of some studies where the male genitals have not descended, have not come out of the body, and it's still inside. And there's surgeries that can correct that, right? And that there may be a mix-up of hormones, right? And this is where we can use science, can use hormones in a good way to help get a person back to where they are. But if we don't know where the standard is, then how are they to find who they really are? And I think this is a really important point. Go ahead.
No, I love what you're saying, because it reminds me, in so many ways our society has come to reject the dichotomy of the sexes and the goodness of it, because we're very emotional about this topic and we don't want people to have that conflict. It's painful. We don't want to have the messy conversations about it, and we don't want to come across as jerks. So, but the thing is, like, biologically and even theologically, we know God made male and female. And just talking about, experiencing the physical evil and the suffering that sin has brought into all levels of our existence and creation. It's so hard to keep my thoughts straight here. Just like deafness, I know I mentioned that in our conversation. People who are deaf have inherent dignity and value. They're wonderful. They're interesting. They're lovable. God loves them. But at the resurrection, because we believe in the resurrection of the body, that we will be with our body as one unit for all eternity after the resurrection. At the resurrection, the body will no longer be deaf, because the intention always was that there would be hearing, that they could hear the music and the wind blow. It's a good and a beautiful thing. And so just because some people don't get to experience hearing in this life properly, doesn't mean that we reject hearing as being sort of archaic and irrelevant. And I feel like that's kind of what's happened with gender. So I don't know if you would want to maybe unpack any more about how we got to this point where we want to sort of reject the gender differences and say, no, we need to make room for these alternatives instead of trying to work towards integrity for all people, including working towards getting rid of some of these chemicals, the contraceptives and the heavy metals and the pesticides and the plastics that are estrogenic. Like this is a bigger issue as well. If we love other people and want them to have integrity, like, we have to work on that front even. I guess I'll stop there because I have so many thoughts running around in my brain, and maybe you can make sense of it better.
This is good, and hopefully we're making sense for everybody who's watching this, because there's a lot, as you can see, there's a lot to unpack here. And in a scripture quote, a passage comes to mind as you're talking about it, the man born blind, right? Where the I think it's the Pharisees are asking Jesus, they present a man born blind. Is it his fault, his sin, or the sin of his parents, right? And it's this idea to cast blame. And Jesus cuts the heart of it, says, no, it's neither his sin or the sin of his parents, but his blindness is meant to give glory to God. We're like, think of it. And Natalie, you and I, we're not perfect. I'm sure there's things, I guaranteed I know in myself, there's things that I know. I have had a long-standing, after my battle with lust, there's a long-standing struggle with anger. And having, like, God, why did you give me this? I hate being so upset. Thank God I've found a lot of healing from that. And I think there's still ways to go with that. And when you have small children, they cause frustration. What do you do with that? Learning how to love. That's what it is. And I think actually that may be the answer here. Why a person who is experiencing a dichotomy, a split, an apparent split, and I would say it's a perceived split. That's what I would say, between their body and what they feel, who they really are, is meant to give glory to God. There's something's not right here, that we're not made for totally here on earth. And I think this is where one of those other roots is the idea we want to get rid of suffering because we're trying to create a paradise here on earth. There is a lot of good to this world, but this is not our home ultimately, right? We're meant to live here. We're meant to fulfill this mission. I like to say that after the fall, the mission became not one of utter harmony here, but it became a rescue mission, right? Jesus Christ came to truly save us. And from this perspective are we willing to submit our wounds to the one who was wounded for us? Are we willing to give him our wounds to turn them to scars? Because I think there's a misunderstanding about, like, we hear that phrase is thrown around a lot, right? Oh my gosh, they went through that experience, they're going to be scarred for life. To which I respond, praise God, because a scar is a sign of healing, and it's in our scars that we're going to reveal love. And it's when we have these gaping wounds and we keep jabbing the knife deeper into the wound instead of saying, no, we got to take that out and go to the actual healer, the divine physician, who can bring healing upon there. So I think that would be a first response. But then, where did this come from? Obviously the fall, but I would say more pressing has been the breakdown in marriage and family, right? You can trace the line here. One major thing has been chemical contraceptives that has said that any man can have any woman, no consequences there. And so this is where, as the rates of chemical contraception has come in, the rates of divorce have radically skyrocketed. Why? Because the one thing that held people back in history has been that of adultery, historically. Well, if I can get rid of that one impediment, aka pregnancy, or the apparent thing there, then I can do this with whatever, and nobody's going to find out, apparently. Well, the truth always finds out. AshleyMadison.com. Thank you very much. Right? These things are always out there. But then if the pursuit of our lives is not about building up the next generation, it's not about building up my spouse, but about pursuing as much pleasure as possible. Well, this is where all of the Pandora's box is open. This is where the work I especially do in helping to break those free from pornography attraction. Like, the pornified view of the body is everywhere. If you think it's simply at XXX sites online, you're wrong. It's in our movies, our television shows, our music, at the magazines as you check out at your local supermarket. It's everywhere. It's this view of the body, of not accepting the body for who the body is. You have, like, think of those with opposite sex attraction, right? The body, a woman. I don't know how any woman in this day and age keeps her sanity, because you look at all the ads and all the stuff out there. You have to be a certain size, -2. You have to have perfect size breasts. You have to everything there. And that standard is going to last for about 4 seconds until it changes. And it would drive a person crazy. And if men, forget it, if men ever were judged by that standard, no man would ever be with any woman ever. Okay? Ever. Okay? This is the world we live in. And this is where the split offs there, where we are not accepting people for who they really are as male and female in their given body of where they are. And this wound goes really deep. It's a very deep wound, and it continues to snowball. And so we think that instead of looking back to what was God's original intention, you mentioned that important word, what is God's original intention? We want to say, let's rewrite the whole story in our own image, in our broken image, instead of getting to our true image as beloved sons and daughters of God. And when we don't do this, then we're lost. And I think this is where so many of us find this. And that's why I would say a starting point language-wise is get back to the language of the church, get back to the language of the original story. And if we aren't familiar with theology of the body and being able to speak through those language and the language of gift, no matter how a person perceives them, then we're missing out on the full, shall we say, if this is a war for truth, for love, for meaning, we're missing on the full artillery that we can be using in this. Obviously, and then also to end there, lots of grace. We need lots and lots of grace. We need to pray. We need to engage the sacraments. We need to, if we've got stuff on our plate that we haven't reconciled within ourselves, with God, or with others, we need to take that to the sacrament of confession, get healing. If we need counseling, we need to do that as well, so that we can be present to others.
Thank you so much, Steve. I don't want to leave everybody hanging. I want them to know how they can get a hold of you. Tell us more about this book you have coming down the pike.
Sure. Yeah, we didn't even, I don't even mention that. I've got a book I've been writing for X number of years. I think we're now at 14 years or so. The editing process has been brutal. It is forthcoming. It looks like the end of this year. Please pray for it. It's called Redeemed Vision: Setting the Blind Free from the Pornified Culture. If we talked about this, the pornified view being everywhere, having a proper understanding of the body and how do we see the body correctly is really important. You can check out more of my work. I have my blog and videos at freedom-coaching.net. You can always shoot me an email through that. I'd be honored to chat with any of y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Natalie. Thank you, and blessings on your work.